Hello everyone. Today, as per user request, I'll be showing how to use a drop-down menu in a couple different ways in order to change aspects of your game. Now, if you want to know how to actually create a drop-down menu, check out my previous video in the Advanced UI tutorial series on how to create a drop-down menu. First, I'm going to show off what I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to try and host a game, and we have a drop down here that determines the map. So let's say I want to go to rooms. I don't have very creative names, but I host the game. You can also see that the right scene loaded based on what map I wanted. So with that shown out of the way, we'll be discussing two different things we can use with drop down menus. One, determine which scene to load, and two, determine what game objects to set active or not. First, we're going to start with scenes. Let's go to where the setup initially takes place in server settings. Get rid of this for a moment. And you can see that there are drop-down menus right here. As I've discussed in the other tutorial, that just changes the value that's set. Let's look at where we actually use that value, which you can see when we go to load a scene, which happens when we click host. Now if we look here, we see that it calls the method validate settings. So let's check that method right now. Now you can see it's not a very big method. Most of this doesn't concern us right now. What we're concerned about here is when we load the level. So all you can see I'm doing is I took the ID, which was set by whatever we selected from our drop-down, and grabbed it from this array, which I'll go over there for a moment. This is where the array is set. Now, I can understand if you're concerned, using this directly in the load level can seem risky. Since we're using a drop-down menu, we have complete control over what values these take, and so it should never be an invalid value. If you're really concerned about it though, retrieving invalid values because you forget to say add an item to the list if you want to add a new entry, what you can do here is add an if case like this that brings up a pop-up. Again, like with the drop-downs, I won't discuss pop-up menus here. Check out my previous tutorial on message boxes for that. So let's now cover our next entry, which is changing active objects. So first what I'm going to do is actually show the objects in our scene. Yeah, here we are. You can see these are our controls, and you can see that each set of controls I've grouped in a single object. This is the key to deciding what's active. You need one parent game object to essentially contain all of your objects you want to make appear or disappear all at once. So now that maybe you can get a grasp at how this works, let's look at the actual code that makes this setup. Some of this is legacy code. What we're going to focus on is this internal block right here. There are two different ways you could do this. I have one here that's not in a comment and the other method that's in a comment. This first method, as you saw, I had the game objects already turned on. So in that case, I need to go through all of them and figure out which control scheme is not being used. There are three control schemes. 0 is the accelerometer, 1 is the grouped arrows, and 2 stands for the arrows that were all around the edges of the screen. So if our control scheme is not 1, which means we're not using this control scheme, then we want to set that container, its active state, to false. And the same idea, we go through each one. This could seem like an inefficient method. Fortunately, if this method doesn't suit your fancy, you can also have the opposite effect. Start with your container game objects in the off state, which I can show right here. You just go here and you click this, and this will turn them off. As you can see, they don't show up anymore. And then you'd have your other code set on the one that you want. And this might actually be the better way of handling this. Just keep in mind that if you have them start in the off state, you cannot find the game objects through code. You have to actually include them in the inspector if you want to reference these objects. So that said, let's cover the second method. Here, instead of checking each one individually, we have a switch case where we only go to the control scheme we want. In the case of the first one, since it would use the accelerometer, we don't need to show anything because it just relies on the tilting of the device, so we just break immediately. And for the other two cases, we want to show the control scheme that we will be using for the game, so we set the container's active state to true. Now, obviously, as a safety check, if somehow the control scheme ID ends up as an ID that's invalid, you want to account for this. So we have a default case down here. And when that default case is discovered, we bring a pop-up indicating this, and then we return. We don't want to go any further because an error has occurred. And there you go, very simple. It doesn't really take much to determine what objects to show and what objects don't show up. You just have to organize yourself and see which objects go together and group them into one single game object that you set on and off as needed. Now, obviously, these aren't the only ways you can use drop-down menus. It really depends on the situation. Just remember that whatever variable you use for your drop-down, just treat it like any other variable and how you want it to manipulate the different settings of your game. And that way you can find some other unique ways to make drop-downs affect the different aspects of your game. For example, instead of doing these set actives, let's say you wanted to have a drop-down that changes, say, the type of character, say, that the player picks. Say there are different characters that a player can pick that change like different aspects of the game. Obviously, each one would be a different game object with its own class and how those objects behave. And then you can just use a switch case like this that tells it which one to spawn, and a default case to not keep going in case nothing spawns, because obviously that would be bad. So with that said, if you have any questions about what I've covered, feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for watching.